My name is Rory Carnett. I'm the Director of Business Development and Client Relations for IDP Education in Canada. Presenting today with Leanne and Gary. Just sort of a quick introduction before the formal slides begin. So, the work and ultimate report of the advisory panel on Canada's international education strategy, with their stated goal of doubling current numbers by 2020, and that means 7% growth year over year. And that's generated some interesting conversation across the country. We have provincial targets to lay on top of there. Just one example, BC's May 2012 jobs plan, when they say they want to increase their international students by 50% over 4 years, and that's 47,000 additional students. And so, there are multiple federal and provincial targets at play here, and we'll look at national as well. And whether this work is being done and conducted at sort of national levels, provincial levels, institutional levels, or what sort of the ongoing evolution of that partnership looks like, and I'm going to very prudently stay out of constitutional debates today. A starting point, I think, of promoting Canada's international study destination is just identifying what our current situation is, and that means understanding as clearly as possible sort of how people see us, how we line up against other countries, traditional competitors, and emerging destinations, which is very interesting, looking for the same students, comparing perceptions to reality, and seeing how and where the work might be done in maintaining and improving our image internationally, and in not just attracting more students, but the very best students that we want to bring into the country. In reviewing some of the data beforehand, sort of good and challenging to find that the work that, the research work that IDP did matched very closely to the work that DFATE did in sort of identifying the strengths and weaknesses that we currently have in terms of representing our country. That being said, I was looking at ISEF's data, and there's I guess we'll just call it strength and diversity. They have some interesting data that is in some lines up and some doesn't. I think that's a starting point for some interesting further conversation. So Leanne and I think, are going to be presenting somewhat similar information, but from a different background. Gary's going to personalize it a little bit, talking maybe about his direct experience in recruiting students to Canada directly or through agents, and what work can be done in easing the efforts of Canadian institutions doing this work around the world. I've had some discussions with provincial government representatives as well, and that creates somewhat of a subtext or counterpoint. What it means to stay ahead of the curve, just the importance of having our internal resources and tracking mechanisms keep pace with external recruiting efforts. So, click. What I'll be talking about today, just a very brief introduction to IDP as quickly as possible. I'm going to be looking at current and future international student numbers and the recruitment goals of various countries. Student perceptions of Canada based on our research, measuring these perceptions versus reality, and then a discussion of some recommendations. That's the wrong direction. Okay, so IDP, very quickly, we've established in 1969. We have more than 40 years of experience in international education. We're half owned by the 38 Australian universities, and since the late 80s, we've sort of assisted more than 300,000 students in their continuing education journeys, and a lot of these, of course, include language study. We recruit students from North Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. And where do we send them to? Well, for many years that was Australia, but about 3 years ago, IDP opened up an office in the US to bring students to the US, and after that was the UK. We opened up our Canadian office in January of 2012. We run the IELTS test along with the British Council. We're owner, and we do this in a number of countries, and the British Council does it in some of these same countries and others. We do have experience in language education. We have about 10,000 students a year at our schools in Southeast Asia. And then we do international events. We have about 150 events around the world each year, the biggest one being the AIEC, and I guess that's the CBIE of Australia. That's our event. And 2 weeks ago, actually, was the first DFATE Study in Canada fair in the Philippines, and they actually hired our IDP team in the Philippines to, it certainly wasn't a co-branded event, it's a DFATE event, but we organized that on their behalf and represented some of our client schools there afterwards. And then research. So, you know, we have a research department internal to the company. We also sponsor some as well, but, and, you know, basically, this is some of the recent studies that we've done, and basically what we're looking to do on a continuous basis is understand the student journey and the student experience, and from the earliest decision-making to graduation and employment outcomes. Just for your information, on the IDP website as well, we host the database of research on international education. I think it's the largest collection of online publicly available research data, and you're welcome to it. And it's searchable, so. Looking then, you know, just in terms of some international student flows, you know, the OECD has about 4.1 million tertiary students enrolled outside of their country of citizenship in 2010. And just to talk about the IELTS for about 3 seconds, I mean, the growth in IELTS in 2012 was 1.9 million tests, and that tracks those numbers. But 2 million are studying in English-speaking countries and 2 million in non-English-speaking countries. And in the non-English-speaking countries, there's a wide range of options, and that's a whole, as you know, a whole different presentation and very interesting conversation. But here what we're looking at is the trends of globally mobile tertiary students between 2000 and 2010, so kind of a specific stretch. So the US, while still #1, has lost some of its market share. What's not demonstrated on these numbers for various statistical reasons are Canada and China. So Canada's actually around 5%, and Project Atlas shows that China's market share is actually about 7% right now. So looking forward, I think the dynamic nature and increasing competitiveness of the international education market is a topic of frequent discussion as the number of host countries grows as well, and some with some very bold plans. So this is kind of interesting, I think, because what we have here are the stated goals of a number of destination countries represented on the y-axis by the compound annual growth rate required to achieve these goals. So what percentage do you need year on year on year? What did Einstein say, that one of the greatest miracles was compound interest? Anyway, so Canada, as we said, is looking, you know, to double this number by 2020. We're looking at about a 7% growth every year. Sorry. But interestingly, this line here is the actual global compounded growth rate of international tertiary students using OECD and UNESCO data. So the simple conclusion is that, you know, a number of countries have goals which exceed the global growth rate. And so if the growth rate is correct, then not every country is going to achieve its goals. And if some countries do achieve their goals, it will be at the expense of other countries. And there are actually no stated targets available right now for the US, UK, and Australia, the 3 largest hosts of international students. I've highlighted New Zealand, Canada, China, Singapore. I'll talk about them a little bit later, but just in terms of why China or why Singapore, just to talk about 2 non-traditional or emerging destinations. I mean, China, in one sense, it's very obvious. But at the AIEC conference recently in Australia, the theme was international education in the Asian century, but one specific focus was on the growing demand for a return on investment from studies. And specifically, one of the discussions was the topic of postgraduate work opportunities, and specifically within that, the topic was the meaningful postgraduate work opportunities. And you know, if China, with its growing and huge manufacturing base, can offer these meaningful career jobs, you know, it becomes a place to study engineering and business, and of course, and English, as you know. And then, you know, just moving that to Korean students for a moment, besides the US, you know, Korean student numbers have been falling in English-speaking, traditional English-speaking destinations since 2009, but they represent 1/3 of all those students studying in China. So Singapore, you know, of course, it's an economic hub of Asia. It's a first world country. They have a very aggressive target, and it's over 3 years. It's affordable, it's culturally accessible, and to use a sort of term from Quebec, they have a lot of cultural communities there to absorb and attract students from across different parts of Asia. So just again, bringing back UK, Australia, and the US, just to get a view of the current situation. These are visa grants. 2012 data is not yet available for Canada, but 2011 numbers, so about 98,000 from Canada, 237,000 in the UK, Australia 253, and the US about 458,000 visa grants. So we have, here on the right in the green, I mean, we have the student decision-making pathways, and in the orange are just certain things that we've been measuring over time. And today we're just going to focus specifically on country perceptions and how Canada fits in. So perhaps this is not completely surprising, but in terms of after thinking about what they want to study, country choice is number one for 73% of the students that we surveyed, meaning that the perception, rightly or wrongly, of the advantages of various country destinations is key. And then, so how is that choice made? If any of you are research junkies, I would put you in touch with our head of research, because the way that this particular study was done, as a research amateur, I thought was really interesting. So I'll be happy to share that information with you afterwards. But the key drivers, as reflected in our research, are here, and it's done, again, very interesting choice modeling, maybe. But the ones we're focusing on were quality, post-study work opportunities, affordability, safety, and visa requirements and visa policies. So good news, mostly good news, that based on 2012 research that we did, that looking at Australia, Canada, the UK, and the US, that were perceived at the top of 4 or 5 important categories: affordability, safety, employment opportunities, and the government student visa policies. Now, of course, you can name some exceptions to that, but that's as a general rule. Now, but unfortunately, on the quality scale, student perceptions were less generous, and unfortunate further as if we go back here, that quality is such an important key. So then perceptions versus reality. So just looking first at affordability. Now this little chart here is just an average tuition fee based on the approximate cost to undertake an undergraduate business degree, specific university in each destination. This is indicative, and it doesn't reflect the overall market. And in terms of publishing this report afterwards, I can share all of it, but this is the one slide I've been told to take out, because this is just a particular sample, and it doesn't represent any sound research. But the average living costs on-campus accommodation. So basically, we saw Canada's perceived as the most affordable country. Is it true? I mean, this is very sector specific, obviously, but in this case, for an undergraduate university degree, a 3-year university degree in the UK is less expensive than the 4-year degree in Canada. But then you look at China and Singapore on the right, and that's much more affordable. Another issue to keep in mind here, of course, is about currencies. And certain currencies are pegged to the US dollars, for instance, China and the Middle East, and that makes currency fluctuations perhaps less important in those countries. But in South Asia and Southeast Asia, as you may know, those currencies have lost a lot of value in the last few years to Australia and to Canada. And this has certainly affected student mobility opportunities. From a quality point of view, this is the most controversial, I think, slide here. What we've done here is looked at rankings as a proxy for quality, not because I believe that or because you believe that, but because in the studies that we've conducted on international students, they're using that. Just as a quick anecdote, I was really surprised going to China and India and talking to our staff there, and not expecting them to really, let's say, know about the Maclean's rankings, but our counselors were the ones who brought it up, saying the number of parents and students who walk into their offices holding printouts of Maclean's magazine rankings. So the green lines for each country represent the number of institutions in the Times Higher Ed Top 200. One way of maybe inverting some of this data is to say, well, what percentage of these top 200 institutions make up the total number of universities in that country? But I mean, just going by rankings alone, this is quality is a challenging messaging area, and it ranks first among determiners of country choice. So, just to, and you know, most international students, okay, are not going to be going to MIT or Cambridge, just as most domestic students aren't going to MIT or Cambridge. But Canada needs to leverage data on the high quality of our educational system. You're bringing the focus perhaps away from rankings that students might be coming in with printed out. So one way is, you know, OECD data says very generous things to say about our educational system. But some of you may know Dino Ropo, the manager of international education for the province of Alberta. I'm pretty sure he won't mind me sharing this story, but I was talking to him about this. I'm like, well, you can, you know, kind of change, if people want objective data, let's talk about OECD data. And he laughed at me and he said, okay, well, here's my story. I was in China and I was talking about how favorably the OECD looks at Alberta educational system, and it does, obviously, and it's true. And he said, I had this long presentation, I did all my data, and question period, the hands go up. The first question is, well, how did the universities rank? And so, you know, it sort of went from his presentation right back to what he was trying to circumvent perhaps a little bit. But I think, again, it's important to recognize the role that certain objective data measures, no matter how misleading, play in international student perceptions of Canada, and how we need to sort of manage these and use them to our advantage. Safety, aside from the landing in Halifax on Wednesday morning, I generally feel very safe here, as I think do you. Singapore and China don't appear in these OECD rankings, but in other rankings, Singapore is about tied with the UK and China with the US. You know, you can talk about comparing perception to reality, but I think in the area of safety, this is one where perception maybe is the most important. A few years ago, when they're having their problems in Australia in terms of student violence in Melbourne around 2009, it statistically wasn't any more dangerous to be an international student than it was to be a domestic student in Melbourne at that time. But that's not how it was played in the Indian press. And of course, we've had our issues in Canada over the last couple of years, and then we're all very nervous about what are the short and long-term effects that might have on people's perception of the safety of our country. So, and when we talk about student services at the end, obviously it's just, you know, important that all of our, that we do everything in our power to make sure that we're, of course, taking care of the students that are here, although much is out of our control. I'm going to skip very quickly through this, but looking at employment opportunities, even with Canada does rate favorably in terms of other countries, the UK obviously having clawed back some important permissions recently. I'll just bring your attention, though, to sort of GDP and unemployment in China and Singapore, again talking about the availability of not just jobs, but good jobs. But this is an advantage that we do hold in terms of these employment opportunities, and it's a message that bears repeating. Again, very quickly through here, in terms of visa policies, again, this is so market specific, and as a former person on the side of the schools, like I've had my heartbreaks in Colombia and Turkey and other countries as well. So, but Canada does, you know, just on a big sort of top-down measure, sort of measure reasonably well in terms of visa policies. But just to summarize very quickly, so again, it means, you know, what does staying ahead of the curve mean? I think it means understanding on an ongoing basis the drivers of international student destination choice, and understanding what student perceptions are, and when they're accurate and when they're not accurate, and learning to communicate messages about the high quality of our education system using measures outside of a specific ranking system. And importantly, I think, if students are looking at our institutions and at our provinces through the lens of a view of our country, then whoever is passing on a message, whether again it's schools or organizations, provincial governments or the federal government, that we sort of talk about Canada first and then drill down to the specific message that we want after that. And of course, that's what Languages Canada does very well. And I beg your pardon. Again, so requiring a little bit more thought. I mean, how do we continue to improve our measurements? And not just measuring outcomes, but even where students are studying and what they're studying. I mean, as you may know, the granularity of data that's available to us in Canada is very thin compared to what Australia and the UK and the US produce in terms of our ability to track actual important changes in the country. And then, of course, but again, this is a Languages Canada issue. I know what they're doing in terms of collecting and presenting currently invisible data to key decision and policymakers. You know, watching other countries on a continuous basis on the way that they engage with international students and the way that they promote their messages. how are countries and institutions around the world participating in international recruitment events. I mean, I think Canada's done a great job at NAFSA. I mean, last year I think it was a fantastic space. But private sector and public sector cooperation, which is a big topic and has been growing in Canada, I think facilitated by Languages Canada as well. It's simple things, turnaround times, competitive scholarships, and engaging in international institutional collaborations. And then in conversations with provincial representatives or with schools, then there's a whole issue of capacity and the capacity of our educational system to absorb numbers that we're perhaps seeking. And that's just really a question about student services and support. We have to meet the highest level expectations that we aim to create, and whether it's the Languages Canada work on homestay issues or these are just obvious things that continue. And whatever benchmarking we do, that don't do it selfishly, that this is not intra-institutional benchmarking or even provincial or national, but the student decision-making is happening on a real, of course, on a transnational basis. And so as much as we can make sort of globally applicable benchmarks, that will certainly, aid in the presentation of the advantages of this country. So, and measuring student happiness. I mean, of course, it's important. I mean, it talks about the formation of perceptions of future students based on the experience of those who are now. There's still we continue to work on improving what we offer the world, but we can also continue to improve how we communicate what already makes this country a great place to study. And I'm pleased to turn the presentation over to Leanne. Thank you. Next.
Next. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Leanne Herman from EduCanada at the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. So when Yuri asked me to present with him, I thought that was a really interesting topic and something that, as he was saying, we share a lot of the same data, or not share the same data, but the information that we've collected validates each other. So I thought it would be a good topic for us to talk on together. I wanted to start by saying a little bit about what EduCanada does. For those of you who don't know, hopefully most of you do. And this is just sort of an image of some of the main things that we do and we help with and we can provide as services to you as our clients. Our mandate is to promote Canada as an international study destination. And I have the enviable position to be the next speaker as well, so I'll go into more detail then. So for those of you who want to hear it again, I'll just continue then now to move faster so that we have a little bit of time for questioning. We had a study done, the Coonan report, for the work of our advisory panel that we had in operation last year. And it's interesting findings, and most of you have probably seen this information already, but it shows that the education sector is a very, very large sector in Canada and is worth about $8 billion in expenditures. It creates a lot of jobs, over 86,000 jobs. And as Yuri was saying, that the growth rate for us for the past 5 years, 6 years since EduCanada has been created, and not that we can take credit for all the growth, has been a compound of about 8%. So that's okay, we take credit for it. It was before my time, but I'll take credit anyways. Just a little bit about the language students in Canada. Most of you have probably seen this already or know this, and we got the data from Languages Canada. So it's interesting to see where the language students are coming from, with a lot coming from Saudi, Brazil, China, and Mexico, and Japan and Korea as well. So looking forward at our priority markets that we're hoping to work on, 4 of those, the ones that are colored in red there, match with the priority market recommendations from the advisory panel. So we're in good sync together there. A little bit of where they're studying, what provinces. Most of the language students, as you probably already know, are studying in BC, followed by Ontario and then Quebec. And interesting to note the period of language study. based on the data we received. Most of the students are here for a shorter term, up to 24 weeks, although I understand that that length is growing and that now for 2012 the average was 14 weeks. A little bit about how we're going to stay ahead of the curve and what we're doing. So the international education strategy and how we're developing that, a bit about the process. In Budget 2011, and those of you that were here last year or in Vancouver, I spoke a little bit about this then too. In Budget 2011, there was money set aside in the fiscal framework for the development of an international education strategy and also for the setting up of an advisory panel to help us with the development of that strategy. So the advisory panel was formed last October 2011, I guess a year and a half ago now, and they set out a three-pronged engagement process, doing online consultations, and several of you, and certainly Languages Canada, put in online submissions. They then did a cross-Canada tour, hitting all the major cities. And then the third part was what we called a collaboratory, where a smaller group, about 55 people, came together and talked specifically about specific recommendations. The final report was presented to the Minister of International Trade in August here in Halifax, in fact. And that coincided with the launch of the consultations for the Global Commerce Strategy refresh. And now we're waiting with bated breath for a budget announcement for the 2013 budget, which should come out sometime before the end of March for the federal government. So we're hoping that there'll be some funding there for us to implement a program strategy. So some of the recommendations, if you haven't had a chance to read the advisory panel's report, doubling the number of students, an international mobility program, which was very important to the panel, to have Canadians to have the opportunity to travel abroad and do things internationally, because right now the number of Canadians, youth going abroad is not very significant, and it should be higher. Focusing on a limited number of priority markets, you saw on the other chart what some of those priority markets are, and increased marketing of our brand, the Imagine brand, and that's certainly something that we're looking forward to doing. For those of you who have seen our websites, they could be better, and they will be. There's a lot of information there, but being in the digital age, I think we need to be in a more creative, more engaging space, more social media and all the rest that everyone says is important. Branding Canada through scholarships. We already have quite a large scholarship offering, but putting those all under one roof in the sense of an overarching brand for Canada, so that we get more bang for the buck of what we're doing, instead of having different scholarships that nobody really knows that they're all tied together somehow from Canada. Kind of like the Fulbright. Everybody knows the Fulbright's from the United States, or the Rhodes Scholar, things like that. And then, of course, improving visa processing. So I am not a CIC visa officer, I'll say that right now, so when the questions do come, I will not be able to answer any of those. We had a public opinion research done as part of the work for the advisory panel to help inform them, and it was quite interesting for us to see what was said. So this is from the perspective of the students, parents, and advisors, what they're looking for. As Yuri mentioned, school rankings are important for the students. For the parents, the cost, of course, is something that they're looking for. And then for advisors, issues about application selection process, how is that done? How easy is that to facilitate? So each group is looking for something different, but it's not surprising. From the public opinion research that we did have done, there's good and bad news, but the bad news is good as well. The bad news is that people don't know about Canada, and when we had the debrief on the public opinion research, the company that did it for us, which was Ipsos Reid, they said that's good news, because at least you don't have a bad brand. So there's something that we can build upon, and people's minds are open to what Canada is. But the things that they did say, for those of them that do know Canada, lack of prestige, no top-ranked universities, lack of awareness. But on the positive side, and that sort of matches with what Yuri was saying, we're affordable, we're welcoming, and then there's also opportunities for working, which is important. And the fact that we're also bilingual. And I think all of you none of you are wearing headphones, but if you are, je suis capable de parler en français aussi, sauf si vous avez des questions, n'hésite pas à poser ces questions en français au cas où. Oops. So a little more, we must seize the opportunity to be able to stay ahead of the curve. We need to build on the image of quality education, and that's certainly something that we have to offer. The rankings are important, but we do quite well in the rankings. In fact, we have 25 universities that are in the top rankings, depending on what ranking you look at. And that's all important for you as well as language schools, that you want to make sure that the kids that come then have those opportunities. So they have no concrete impression of Canada. Just quickly on what we have been doing and working with you on different things. We've done lots and lots of promotional events. This past year, working through our embassies and consulates, over 170 events in more than 70 countries. A lot of those are education fairs, and many of you have participated in those fairs, which is great. I think there were 45 language schools participating in fairs this year, which has grown over the past several years. We have the Imagine brand. We have lots of promotional materials that we hand out and that we encourage others to use. We also have market reports, which are quite interesting, that are comprehensive market reports we have around, it says 40 here, but we're close to 50, just over 50 now, that have been done in the past year. So those are all available to you. If you're going to a certain market and you want to know what's happening there, please do contact us and we can get you those reports. The Canada Course for Education agents, that was mentioned this morning by ISEF, we're working with them, and also with Languages Canada, who we've partnered with to deliver that course, and I'll be talking about that later in the next presentation. So, what will we be doing with an international education strategy? More specifically, we will try and focus more on the priority markets and look at developing country strategies that give us action plans and allow us to focus more of our attention on those specific markets. Better branding, better marketing, of course. As I was mentioning, a more robust e-communication strategy, and then also training and support for our embassy and our staff overseas so that they can better serve you. We do right now webinars, and Languages Canada participated recently in a webinar with our embassies to give them information about your sector and what you're looking for, and how we as trade commissioners can better service you. So what does this mean going forward for you? Again, more support that we can provide, more visibility in the sense that the brand will be more visible, and more marketing. The strategies, having these focused strategies, should allow us to target better. And then the e-communications plan, which will hopefully allow us to reach a broader audience and be more attractive than to Canada. And then doing more events and such. We're certainly hoping to do that. And then also on the side of the partnerships, that's an important component as well, that we can strengthen the partnerships and linkages between Canadian institutions and foreign institutions. So a little bit about some of our websites here that you can see. The education in Canada is on the top right there. Hopefully all of you know that website and use it regularly. On the bottom left corner is the scholarships website. It has a very good feature that students can look and find out if there are scholarships that are available to them from the federal government. So you just put what country you're from and then you can see that. Some of our brochures and marketing tools that we have. And then EduCanada Pro, and I think I'll talk about that. Oh, and then You can see some of our branding when we do go to international events, what we try to market Canada as. And I think that's very useful for all sectors in the sense that you don't have to sell Canada. We're selling Canada on your behalf. And through that, you can talk about Canada and the importance of it, but then you don't have to spend half the time that you're talking to someone convincing them that Canada's the right spot. We're working with you to do that. And then just some different booths that we've set up so that you can sort of see what it looks like at big events. So that's it for me. And we'll have the questions at the end, I guess.
Thanks, Leanne and Yuri. So yeah, it says I'm owner of Heartland International English School in Winnipeg. I started the school in 1999. And another position I hold that brings a little different perspective to it, I'm also a school trustee in Louis Riel School Division in Winnipeg, a school division with about 14,000 students, and have been doing that for about 6.5 years, so kind of know the K-12 landscape a little bit too. Yuri asked me a few days ago to fill in for someone who couldn't make this portion of the event, and said, well, we just want sort of the on-the-ground perspective. We're giving these reports and statistics. Is this what you're seeing on the ground? Give us that perspective on it. So I'll try and do that as much as I can. I think maybe also he was appreciative that I'm from Winnipeg, and he probably thought, well, if someone's having problems with Canada, the Winnipeg's probably like multiplied effect trying to get someone to Winnipeg. So maybe that was maybe a bit of attraction for me helping him out here as well.
In February.
In February, right. Yeah, and so, Winnipeg's not on the radar screen a lot of times, may not hear about it much, so just a little bit of news for those who may not know. The Jets are back. And so, yeah, you wouldn't believe what this has done for the psychology of the city. It's crazy, but anyway. Winnipeg I was talking to someone the other day, I said, just when I came to the conference, I said, yeah, we have this perpetual inferiority complex that we have to explain to people all the time, defend ourselves. And they said, no, it's a defensive policy. It's not inferiority. I said, well, that's a better way to look at it, but whatever. Anyway, we're back in the big leagues, so anyway. So I was kind of thinking about this in terms of, what you had seen the presentation, and, what does this really mean when we're recruiting students? And I sort of think, well, what really affects us, the quality education. And I was kind of really focusing on the quality piece there. And yeah, it's important, but there's a lot of realities that we all know, 9/11, SARS, H1N1, economic crisis, currency, whatever, devaluations, that we see that really are kind of these real things that happen to us on the macro level. And so I started kind of making a laundry list of this, but I thought, well, I don't know how that useful. Most people have probably gone through it. So I thought, well, maybe we can just look at sort of a tool that we can look, or a framework that we can actually look at this through. And maybe some of you have seen this before, this PESTLE. I mean, there's other ones. PESTLE is really good for, or more of a macro type of tool to look at something. I mean, you can do sort of a Porter's 5 forces, which is more, specific to your company. But I thought anyway, just for purposes of conversation, this may be a good way to frame what we're looking at, what's happening out there that affects our businesses on a big level. So on the political one, an example I thought of was in 2008, I did 9 months, I worked with Navitas when they're setting up their International College in Manitoba with the University of Manitoba and doing some work with them. And so Africa was one of the markets they had given me. And I was to go to Kenya, Zambia, and Nigeria. And about 2 months before I started the process for the Nigerian visa, because we knew it was really long, and it was crazy sending passports to New It was craziness. Anyway, I didn't get a visa. They said, go ahead, go, because Nigeria is the last stop on the circuit, and there's a Nigerian embassy or consulate, whatever, in Zambia. Stop there and get your Nigerian visa there. And I was there for like 3 or 4 days scheduled only. So I go there trying to do this, get this last minute visa, and went to the embassy every day for 5 days in a row in the morning. And so I finally, at the 5th day, I was frustrated, and to the point, I don't like to admit this, but I was sitting at the desk, and they were just stonewalling me, and they wanted to take my visa and the money, whatever, anyway. And I kind of lost it for a whole bunch of reasons, and I said, F you and F your effing country. And, and at that point, as I was getting away from the desk, I thought, I'm actually in Nigerian territory in Zambia, and there's a guy with a machine gun at the door. this probably, that wasn't a very smart move. So anyway, I left and didn't get the visa, needless to say. But anyway, the story actually, I mean, besides that being a stupid story, the political thing that was going on that I didn't know about until later was that the Canadian embassy had refused the Nigerian ambassador to Canada's kid, son or daughter, I'm not sure, a study permit to come to Canada. And it was a tit for tat, so they weren't issuing any visas for Canadian education institutions to do recruiting in Nigeria. So it's a political thing, totally out of the realm. Too bad I didn't know that before. I wouldn't have, you know, wasted my time. And actually I had to bribe my way out of Zambia because I didn't realize that when they stamp your visa, they only give you how many days you're supposed to be there, and I had to change my flight. I stayed an extra 2 days. I ended up having to bribe my way out. That's a different story. So economic, I think we would all know this. You just have to say 2008, and we can all relate, I'm sure. Big social effects. We've been talking, you know, I've heard a lot of talk at the conference here about Korean numbers being down. And I think one of the things there is that it's, certain countries are fashionable, you know, and there's a certain piece where it just, in Korea, it's just not as cool to go to Canada, or it's cooler to go to other places. And so there's sort of the social thing, again, that, you know, really is beyond the control of an individual institution. The technological, and this one really interests me because there's been a lot of talk recently about these MOOCs, massively online open online courses that a lot of the big universities are rolling out. And how does that affect, you know, education, and how is that gonna roll out? You know, are we sort of being naive like the record industry and saying, oh, it won't affect us, people are still gonna buy CDs? I mean, is that really something as, you know, language trainers, are people gonna stop coming because the technology changes the landscape for us? You know, obviously I don't have the answer, but it's, you know, it's sort of those big things to think about. Legal, I mean, the whole, one of the big talks, you know, in this conference, the changes to ISP, obviously there's a legal change that's really affecting us. The environmental is a bit stretched, I don't know, climate change, maybe people, you know, start thinking they shouldn't travel as much because air travel, so, you know, so much carbon emissions from that, I don't know. Anyway, that's a bit of a stretch maybe, but anyway, just the idea is sort of maybe looking at a framework to think about these things that are really beyond our control. But some of them we can. When we look at the legal and the ISP, we can say, okay, well, you know, we can actually influence that. And there's kind of this term of, you know, macroeconomics, mesoeconomics, where you can have some kind of influence. You know, the Nigerian example, I mean, well, I suppose you could lobby the government to change their views, but, you know, with the ISP, that's something where, all right, we may not be able to, but we can, so let's do what we can sort of attitude, and identifying those ones where we can and we can't. So back to the whole quality issue, and I think that is somewhere where we can talk about quality, because we do have great education system in Canada, and this is kind of where the K-12 thing I'm going to pull in. And with the rankings being such an important thing, one of my other markets when I did the little Navitas thing was with India, and I mean, it was just unreal, you know, and the Canadian officials there were saying, they got it, they said, you know, well, the rankings that you're looking at, Canada's different, you know, you got to think about Canadian education in a different way than you might look at the US or something like that. And then in the next breath, they'd say, well, here's the Maclean's rankings. You know, so, you know, even though, because it goes back to the story before about Alberta, where, you know, at the end of the day, that's what they're asking about. So I guess one way to do would be to play the rankings game, and that's where, at least in the K-12 context, the PISA results are, you know, consistently show Canada ahead in all categories of the UK and US and Australia. So, you know, do you sort of just change the channel? You're still talking about rankings, but, you know, look at those ones that are favorable. And the other thing I'm going to throw out here, and just as a conversation piece more than anything, is can we just change the story and talk about what Canadian education, I think, is doing differently? One of the big pushes across Canada in the K-12 is over the last decade has really been looking at assessment, evaluation, and reporting. and doing that in a different way. And in Manitoba, we've just gone through this process and implemented a new report card and reporting system and all this in the last couple of years. And the old system really based on this bell curve, and we're saying, well, only so many people can be successful, and you have to fit in that. And really shifting the curve and saying, no, we can have everyone be successful. We don't have to have a 67% bell curve middle, and half have to fall above that and half have to fall below that, and that's the way we work. This idea of let's make everyone successful. And I'm by no means expert on this. This is just kind of very cursory kind of thinking. And so can we change the conversation about what quality education means? Because the rankings, they do make sense in a lot of contexts. I lived in Japan for 3 years and taught, I'll use the term loosely, in junior high schools there. And it was amazing the pressure on them in grade 7 and 8 for testing to get into the right high school, to get into the right university. And teaching the grade 7 kids English, they were super excited about it and, lots of energy. By the time they got to grade 8, they were starting to think about exams. By the time it's grade 9, it's like, nah, you can't come to the classroom today. We've got to focus on the test. And they're teaching to the test because the test gets them into the right high school, which gets them into the right university. And the big thing there is that what university you get into matters, because, you look at the bureaucrats in Japan. Well, we'll use that word. I know we talked earlier in the week about not using that word, but the people that worked in the bureaucracy in Japan, it was some amazing statistic, like nearly 50% of those people had come from 3 universities, right? If you want to work for Sony or Honda or Toyota, like you go to a specific university. So that really matters, which is really different than the Canadian context. And I'm trying to explain it by a story. In Canada, there's sort of, I guess it's more egalitarian, I think. And it really depends more on how you do at university, not which university you went to. Going to University of Manitoba and going to the law school, University of Manitoba just pulled out of the Maclean's rankings because we were always bottom. And I think finally they said, why bother? If we're going to be at the bottom of the list, let's just not be on the list. And they pulled out of it completely. And so technically we were the worst university for, in Canada, I suppose, if you want to look at the rankings. Yet I had classmates who got the best job and, went clerk to the Supreme Court. So, that's kind of the story I think we need to get out there. And I'm not telling anything to anyone here that they don't know. But so I don't have the answer, but how do we change that conversation? And I see it when I go down to conferences in the United States with the school board, and you see the quality of Canadian public education versus the States, the problems they deal with. And, the lack of funding down there, it's not, certain areas that do and don't, but, sort of generalizing, I mean, our K-12 public education system is light years ahead of the States from what they're doing. And the quality is just like, light years ahead of what they're doing down there. So I think there's a Canadian education quality story to tell. And I think, I don't know how to change that conversation, but if we could, I think that we're doing quality well. We all know that. But there's a perception. It goes back to the perception that we're not doing quality well. How do we change that? I don't have the answer. I'm just throwing it out there. Thanks.